On a stormy night in Detroit, rain pounded narrow alleys lit only by flickering neon. Angela Moore, a black police officer 7 months pregnant, clutched a folder of evidence exposing corruption. Her steps were heavy but determined. She knew she was being followed. A gang ambushed her, fists and boots raining down, blood mixing with water. Just as despair closed in, a poor boy appeared, wielding a broken stick and shouting, "Leave her alone!" In that moment, the shadows of Detroit revealed their darkest secrets, and against the storm, a fragile spark of hope began to burn. Before we dive deeper together into this mysterious journey, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on Justice Voice and turn on the notification bell. That way, every thrilling and surprising story will always reach you first. The rain had been falling all day, but by nightfall it had turned into a relentless storm that seemed determined to wash away the streets of Detroit. In the narrow alleys of the east side, where the old brick buildings leaned tiredly against one another, and broken street lamps flickered weakly, the storm only deepened the sense of abandonment. Water coursed through the gutters, carrying scraps of paper, crushed cans, and broken glass, while shadows danced in the dim glow of neon signs that still buzzed over rundown bars and pawn shops. Angela Moore pulled the collar of her long coat higher, her hand instinctively resting on the curve of her swollen belly. 7 months along. Each step was slower than it once had been, but her stride still carried the sharp purpose of a woman who had sworn an oath to protect. Her breath misted in the cold air as she moved cautiously through the maze of alleys. She knew she was being followed. It had started earlier that afternoon when she left the precinct with a folder hidden in her bag. Evidence. The kind that could shatter careers, topple reputations, and drag corruption out of the shadows. She had been warned quietly, through sideways glances and clipped words, that she was playing with fire. But Angela had never been the type to turn her head away from the truth. Now, with rain soaking through her clothes and her boots splashing against puddles, she realized the fire had come for her. From behind, footsteps quickened. Not one pair, several. Heavy, deliberate, unafraid of being heard. Angela quickened her pace, turning sharply into a side alley, lined with dumpsters and graffiti-stained walls. The storm masked some of the noise, but not enough. Her pulse drummed in her ears. "Evening, officer," a voice called out, low and mocking, as 3 figures stepped into view ahead of her. Angela froze. More shadows emerged behind her, cutting off her retreat. The alley was a trap. She counted at least 6 men, broad-shouldered and wrapped in leather jackets. Their eyes glinted with the kind of confidence that came from knowing they had the upper hand. She straightened, refusing to let them see her fear. "You're making a mistake," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm. The leader, a tall man with a shaved head and a scar running from his temple to his jaw, laughed, the sound rough as gravel. "The only mistake is yours, lady. Should have known better than to poke your nose where it doesn't belong." Angela's hand twitched toward the small pistol holstered under her coat, but she hesitated. Not because of fear she had faced men like these before, but because of the life inside her. One wrong move, one blow to her stomach, and it would all be over. The first punch came before she could draw. A fist slammed into her shoulder, spinning her sideways. Another blow followed, striking her ribs. Pain burst through her body, sharp and searing. She staggered but stayed on her feet, her hand finally pulling the gun free. She fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the bullet echoed down the alley, briefly silencing the storm. But the men only grinned wider. "She's got fight," one of them sneered, before kicking her legs out from under her. She fell hard, the impact jarring her spine. Her gun skittered across the wet pavement, out of reach. The storm swallowed her cries as boots rained down on her. Kicks to her arms, her sides, her back. She curled instinctively, one arm cradling her belly. Every blow felt like it might be the last. Every strike a reminder of how fragile life could be. She thought of her child, the tiny heartbeat she had heard during her last appointment, the flickering image on the ultrasound that had made her smile despite everything. She could not let this be the end. Not here. Not in a filthy alley under the boots of hired thugs. Still, her strength ebbed with each passing second. Blood mixed with rainwater, trickling down her face, soaking her coat. She tried to push herself up, but a hand grabbed her hair and forced her back down. "Stay quiet," the scarred man growled, leaning close enough for her to smell the stench of alcohol on his breath. "You won't be getting back up this time." Angela's vision blurred. For the first time in years, real fear clawed at her chest. Not for herself, but for the unborn child who had no chance to fight back. Her lips parted in a silent prayer. Then, from somewhere beyond the circle of men, another sound cut through the storm. Small, sharp, defiant. The scrape of shoes against wet pavement. "Leave her alone," a voice shouted. It was high-pitched, trembling, but filled with courage. The men turned, surprised. Standing at the mouth of the alley was a boy, no older than 12. His clothes were threadbare, his hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, but in his hands he gripped a broken wooden stick like it was a sword. His eyes, wide with fear, still burned with something fiercer than any of the thugs expected. Angela blinked through the haze of pain, her heart lurching at the sight. "A child. Here." The boy's voice cracked as he yelled again, but he didn't back down. "Get away from her!" The men laughed cruelly, shaking their heads. "Look what we got here," one of them mocked. "A little hero." But in that instant, despite her injuries, despite the rain and the blood, Angela felt something shift. Hope, fragile but real, sparked within her. The storm had brought her enemies into the open. But maybe, just maybe, it had also brought her salvation. The boy did not wait for their laughter to fade. He lunged forward with a cry that sounded more like desperation than battle, swinging his broken stick at the closest man. The wood cracked against the thug's arm with a dull thud, not enough to do real damage, but enough to shock him. "Kid!" the man barked, staggering back a step. "What the—" Before he could finish, the boy grabbed a loose rock from the ground and hurled it. It struck another man squarely on the temple. He cursed, stumbling, hands flying to his head. Angela's eyes widened. Through the pain and haze, she watched this scrawny, rain-soaked child stand between her and men twice, 3 times his size. His knees were shaking, his chest heaving, but he didn't run. He stood. The scarred leader snarled, his amusement evaporating. "Grab him!" That was all the boy needed. He darted to Angela's side, his small hands surprisingly firm as they slipped under her arm. "Come on, lady," he whispered urgently. "We gotta move." Angela tried to protest, tried to tell him it was too dangerous, but her body betrayed her. She could barely lift herself, let alone fight. The boy hauled her up with a strength that seemed born of pure will. Together, they stumbled toward the mouth of the alley. Shouts erupted behind them. Heavy boots splashed through puddles, gaining ground. Angela's head spun, her vision clouding at the edges, but she forced her legs to move. Each step was agony, her body screaming in protest. But the boy's grip was steady, guiding her through the storm. They burst out of the alley into another, narrower passage choked with trash cans and crates. The boy led her down it without hesitation, as though he knew every turn, every shortcut. "What's your name?" Angela managed to gasp between breaths. "Ethan," he panted. "Keep going." The world became a blur of movement, dark walls, slick pavement, flashes of neon through the sheets of rain. Angela's lungs burned, and her swollen belly ached with every jolt. She prayed her child would survive the ordeal. Behind them, the gang's voices grew louder. "They went this way," one shouted. Ethan pulled Angela toward a broken chain-link fence. With surprising agility, he wriggled through a gap at the bottom, then reached back for her. She hesitated, her body too big, too slow, but he yanked at her sleeve, urgency blazing in his eyes. "Trust me," he urged. With a grunt, Angela dropped to her knees and forced herself through. The fence scraped her back, her belly pressed against the cold metal, but somehow she made it. Ethan caught her on the other side, helping her up before pulling her into another alley. They stumbled into a courtyard of abandoned buildings, windows boarded, doors hanging loose. Ethan guided her toward one of them, a crumbling 2-story structure with half its roof missing. He shoved the door open and hurried her inside. The smell of mildew and rot filled the air, but it was shelter. Ethan closed the door quietly, then dragged a broken chair against it. Not much, but enough to buy time. Angela collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving. Blood trickled from her lip, mixing with the rain on her face. She pressed a hand to her belly, relief flooding her when she still felt movement inside. Ethan knelt beside her, his small hands fumbling with a piece of cloth he'd torn from his own shirt. "You're bleeding," he said, his voice trembling. He pressed the fabric against a cut on her forehead, his touch gentle. Angela looked at him closely for the first time. His eyes were large, too old for his face, filled with a kind of wary determination she had seen only in those who had survived more than their share of hardship. His clothes were thin, patched in places, his shoes worn through at the soles. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered hoarsely. "They'll come after you now." "They were going to kill you," Ethan replied simply. His hands didn't stop working, tying the cloth as best he could. "Couldn't just watch." Angela's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to tell him he should have run and saved himself, but the words died on her tongue. Instead, she reached out and placed a trembling hand over his. "You saved my life," she said softly. "You saved us both." Ethan swallowed hard, looking down. For a moment, the hardened mask of bravery slipped, and Angela saw the scared child beneath. But then he squared his shoulders and pulled away, moving to peer through a crack in the wall. "They're still out there," he whispered. "We can't stay long." Angela forced herself to sit straighter, ignoring the throbbing pain in her ribs. "Do you know a way out?" He nodded. "Yeah, I've been living around here for a while. I know places they won't look." The sound of footsteps echoed faintly outside. Voices barked orders, closer now. Angela tensed, her hand hovering near the spot where her gun should have been. She remembered it lying in the alley, lost. Useless. Ethan slipped back to her side. "When I say run, we run. Okay?" Angela gave a weak laugh despite the situation. "You're giving me orders now?" He met her eyes, unflinching. "Somebody's gotta." For the first time since the night began, Angela smiled. A small, weary smile, but real. She nodded. "All right, kid. Lead the way." Ethan waited, listening. The gang's footsteps moved past the building, splashing through puddles. He grabbed Angela's hand and guided her toward the back, where a broken window led into another alley. He climbed through first, then helped her after. They moved again, through alleys and courtyards, weaving like ghosts through the rain. Angela's strength waned, but Ethan never let go of her hand. Each time she stumbled, he pulled her forward, whispering encouragement. At one point, they ducked into a shadow as two men passed within feet of them, flashlights cutting through the downpour. Angela held her breath, clutching Ethan close, praying they wouldn't be seen. When the men disappeared, Ethan whispered, "Almost there." He led her to another building, this one sturdier, its windows intact. Inside, it was dry and quiet, the air heavy with dust. Ethan closed the door gently behind them and lit a small candle from a stash he had hidden there. "This is one of my spots," he explained, setting the candle on a crate. "Nobody comes here." Angela sank onto the floor, exhaustion overtaking her. Ethan rummaged through a bag in the corner and pulled out a tattered blanket, draping it over her shoulders. "You live here?" Angela asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Here and a couple other places," Ethan said with a shrug. "Been on my own a while." Angela's heart ached. No child should have to say that. She reached out, touching his arm gently. "You're brave, Ethan. Braver than most grown men I know." He looked away, embarrassed. "Just didn't want you to die." Silence settled between them, broken only by the sound of rain on the roof. For the first time in hours, Angela allowed herself to breathe. They were safe for now. But she knew it wouldn't last. The men who had attacked her wouldn't stop until their job was done. And now, because of his courage, Ethan was caught in the crossfire. She closed her eyes, resting a hand on her belly. The baby kicked softly, a reminder of what was at stake. When she opened her eyes again, she found Ethan watching her, his expression unreadable. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Angela drew in a slow breath. "Now, we figure out how to fight back. The storm had not let up. It hammered the roof of the abandoned building in relentless sheets, drumming against the rusted gutters and broken windows. Inside, the flickering candle cast long shadows across the walls, painting the room with an uneasy glow. Angela leaned back against the crate, every muscle aching, but her mind too alert to let sleep claim her. Ethan sat across from her, knees drawn to his chest, eyes fixed on the flame. His clothes were still damp, his hair plastered to his forehead, but he didn't complain. Every so often he glanced toward the boarded-up windows, his ears tuned to sounds only he seemed able to catch. Angela studied him quietly, 12 years old, she guessed. Too young to carry the weight of survival on his shoulders, yet everything about him, from his sharp watchfulness to the careful way he spoke, told her he had been carrying it for years. "Ethan," she said softly, breaking the silence, "why didn't you run? When you saw them hurting me, you could have stayed hidden. No one would have blamed you." He looked at her, eyes flashing with something she couldn't quite name. "Because I know what it's like when nobody comes. I couldn't just watch it happen. Her throat tightened. She wanted to reach for him, to offer comfort, but she knew better. Comfort was something he hadn't known in a long time. Instead, she gave a small nod. "You're a good kid." He shrugged, turning his gaze back to the candle. "Good, don't keep you fed." Angela almost smiled at the bitter wisdom in his words. Almost. Outside, the faint roar of engines drifted through the storm. Angela's body stiffened, instinct pulling her upright. Ethan noticed instantly. "They're looking," he whispered. Angela crawled closer to the wall and peered through a crack. Headlights cut through the rain, slow-moving, methodical. A car, maybe two, cruising the alleys. She could make out the shadows of men leaning out, scanning the darkness with flashlights. Her stomach sank. They weren't giving up. Ethan was already on his feet, snuffing the candle with a quick breath. Darkness swallowed the room. "We can't stay here," he murmured. Angela grabbed his wrist gently. "Wait." Her voice was firm but low. "We need a plan. Running blind will only get us caught." Ethan hesitated, clearly torn between instinct and obedience. Angela saw the tension in his small frame, the boy who had learned to survive by never staying in one place, never trusting that safety could last. She squeezed his wrist lightly. "Trust me, all right, just for a moment." He nodded reluctantly, lowering himself back down beside her. The cars passed, their beams sweeping over boarded windows before moving on. Silence crept back, broken only by the storm. Angela let out a slow breath, her ribs aching with the motion. She pressed her hand to her side, feeling the sharp sting of bruises. She could still taste blood at the corner of her mouth. Ethan noticed. "You need a doctor." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "You think I don't know that? Then why aren't we going?" "Because the people who sent those men, they're not just some gang. They've got eyes everywhere. Hospitals, police, even in the precinct." Ethan frowned, confusion flickering across his face. "But you're a cop. Don't cops help each other?" Angela stared into the darkness for a long moment, weighing her words. Then she said quietly, "Not all of them." It was the first time she'd said it out loud, the truth that had haunted her for months. Ethan leaned closer, his curiosity outweighing his fear. "What do you mean?" Angela shifted, pulling her coat tighter around her. She hesitated, but there was something in Ethan's steady gaze that broke through her guardedness. "I found something," she whispered. "Files, documents, proof that some of the people in my department, people in charge, have been working with criminals, taking money, covering up crimes, letting gangs run free in exchange for their silence." Ethan's eyes widened. "Like the guys who attacked you?" She nodded grimly. "Exactly like them. They were sent to stop me, to make sure I never talked." The weight of her confession hung heavy in the air. Angela hadn't planned to tell anyone, especially not a child, but tonight had shattered all her plans. If she didn't make it, someone had to know. Ethan's small fists clenched around the hem of his shirt. "That's not right," he muttered fiercely. "Cops are supposed to protect people." "They are," Angela agreed softly. "And some of us still do. But when power and money get involved, it changes people. For a long moment, Ethan sat in silence, chewing on her words. Then he looked up at her, his expression set with a determination far too old for his years. Then you gotta show them. You gotta show everybody what you found. Angela's chest ached, not from her injuries, but from the sudden rush of emotion. The conviction in his young voice reminded her why she had started this fight in the first place. I will, she promised, but I need to make it out of tonight first. As if to punctuate her words, a loud crash echoed in the distance. Metal on metal, voices shouting. Ethan scrambled to the window crack, his body taut with tension. They're close again, he hissed. Angela forced herself to her feet, biting back the pain. Then we move, quietly. We'll find somewhere safer. Ethan nodded and slung his small bag over his shoulder. Without another word, he guided her to the back of the building, through a door half hidden behind stacks of old pallets. It opened into another alley, narrower, darker. The storm swallowed their footsteps as they slipped out. They moved like shadows, sticking close to walls, avoiding light. Every time a car rolled by, they pressed themselves into doorways, holding their breath until it passed. At one point, Angela stumbled, her strength faltering. Ethan caught her arm quickly, steadying her. His eyes met hers, steady despite the fear around them. Almost there, he whispered. Where? She asked. He pointed toward a row of buildings further down, one taller than the rest. There's a place up top. No one goes there. We can see everything. Angela nodded, letting him lead. By the time they reached the building, the storm had dulled into a steady drizzle. Ethan pulled her through a side door, guiding her up a flight of creaking stairs. The air smelled of rust and mold, but at the top they emerged into a room with broken windows overlooking the city. From here, Angela could see the sprawl of Detroit's east side streets glistening with rain, police sirens wailing in the distance, and somewhere below, the cars still hunting them. Ethan dropped his bag, pulling out another small candle and lighting it. The warm glow softened the room. Told you, he said with a faint grin. Safe. Angela sank onto the floor, exhaustion pulling at her again. She watched Ethan move around the room, arranging their little hideout with practiced ease. He was just a boy, but tonight he had been her protector, her guide. Ethan, she said quietly. He turned. Thank you. He shrugged, trying to act nonchalant, but his ears flushed red. You'd have done the same. Angela smiled faintly. Maybe. But it still matters. For the first time since the attack, she felt a sliver of hope. She wasn't alone. And sometimes, even the smallest ally could change everything. But deep down, she knew the night was far from over. The men who hunted her wouldn't stop until they were sure she was gone. And if the corruption in her department ran as deep as she suspected, then danger would follow them long after the storm ended. Still, as she looked at Ethan, his eyes fierce, his shoulders squared despite the weight of the world, she felt a renewed strength stirring inside her. She had something worth fighting for. Two things, in fact. Her child, and the boy who had saved them both. The drizzle had turned into a mist by dawn, leaving the city wrapped in a damp chill. From the top floor of the abandoned building, Angela could see the horizon glowing faintly, the promise of morning breaking through the storm. Yet the light brought no comfort. If anything, it made them more vulnerable. Ethan had dozed off beside the wall, his thin frame curled under the tattered blanket he had given her the night before. Angela watched him sleep, his face softened in rest, the sharp edges of survival momentarily smoothed away. For a fleeting moment, he looked like any 12-year-old boy, not the hardened child who had dragged her through the rain to safety. But reality pressed hard against the quiet. The bruises on her ribs burned with every breath. Her head pounded, her lip was swollen, and though the baby shifted gently within her, Angela knew she was pushing her body to its limit. She could not stay here. Neither of them could. A noise below shattered the fragile calm. Engines. Angela froze, straining to listen. 2, maybe 3 cars. Doors slamming. Men's voices, muffled but unmistakable, drifting up from the street. Her stomach clenched. They had found them. She moved quickly to Ethan's side and shook his shoulder gently. "Ethan?" she whispered urgently. He blinked awake, confused. "What?" "Shh, they're here." In an instant, the drowsiness vanished from his eyes. He sat up, alert, his body taut like a coiled spring. He crawled to the broken window and peered down. "3 cars," he confirmed, his voice low. "That's at least 8 guys." Angela's mind raced. Too many, too armed. They couldn't fight, not like this. Ethan turned back, his face pale but steady. "We gotta move." She nodded, forcing herself upright despite the pain. "Which way?" "There's another stairwell on the far side," he whispered. "Goes down to the alley. We can slip out the back before they spread out." But even as he said it, footsteps echoed in the stairwell nearby. Heavy boots climbing steadily. They were already inside. Angela grabbed Ethan's hand, her heart thundering. "Come on." And they moved swiftly across the dusty floor, keeping low. Angela's body screamed in protest, but adrenaline drowned out the pain. She followed Ethan to the far stairwell, only to hear more voices below. Trapped. Ethan's eyes darted around, panic flickering across his face. Angela squeezed his hand firmly, grounding him. "We'll find a way." She scanned the room. Broken windows. Crumbling walls. No safe path until her gaze landed on a narrow fire escape clinging to the side of the building. Rusted, half broken, but still intact. "There," she said. Ethan's eyes widened. "That thing'll fall apart." "Maybe," Angela admitted. "But it's our only shot." Together they crossed the room, keeping close to the shadows. Angela pushed the window open carefully, the rusty hinges groaning. The sound seemed deafening. She froze, listening. Voices were closer now, boots clanging against metal as the gang searched floor by floor. "Go first," Angela urged. Ethan hesitated, then swung himself onto the fire escape with practiced ease. The old metal groaned but held. He looked back at her, motioning for her to follow. Angela gritted her teeth and climbed out, her belly making the maneuver clumsy, painful. The cold metal was slick with rain, every step a gamble. Below, the street stretched out, empty for now but exposed. Halfway down, the fire escape shuddered violently. Angela gasped, clutching the railing. Ethan froze, eyes wide with fear. "Keep going," she whispered hoarsely. "Don't look back." They made it to the second floor when the window above them burst open. A man leaned out, his face twisted with fury. "There they are!" he roared. Gunfire exploded, bullets sparking against the metal. Ethan ducked, covering his head. Angela pressed him against the wall, shielding him with her body as best she could. "Move!" she hissed, pushing him downward. They stumbled the rest of the way, the fire escape rattling beneath their weight. At the bottom, Ethan leapt into the alley, reaching up to help her. Angela dropped down, her legs nearly buckling, but she forced herself upright. "Run!" They sprinted down the narrow alley, bullets pinging off brick walls behind them. Angela's lungs burned, each breath ragged, but she pushed forward, driven by sheer will. Ethan led, darting left then right, weaving through the maze of alleys he knew like the back of his hand. But the gang was relentless. Their footsteps thundered behind, their shouts growing louder. At last, they burst into a small courtyard, boxed in by chain-link fences. Dead end. Ethan skidded to a halt, panic flashing in his eyes. No, this way's supposed to be open." Angela turned, chest heaving. The men were closing in, their shadows stretching long in the rising dawn. For a split second, Angela considered giving up. Her body was failing, the baby was at risk, and Ethan was just a child caught in a nightmare that wasn't his. She couldn't let him pay the price. She grabbed his shoulders, her voice fierce. "Listen to me. You hide. You don't come out no matter what you hear." He shook his head wildly, tears mixing with the rain. "No, I'm not leaving you." "You have to," she insisted, her grip tightening. "They want me, not you. If they take me, you'll still have a chance. You can tell someone the truth." Ethan's face crumpled. "But I can't." Angela pulled him close, her voice breaking. "You saved me, Ethan. You saved my baby. That's more than anyone's ever done for me. But now you have to save yourself." The gang rounded the corner, weapons raised. Angela shoved Ethan toward a gap in the fence, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. "Go!" she cried. For a heartbeat, Ethan froze. Then, with a strangled sob, he slipped into the gap, disappearing into the shadows. Angela turned to face the men, her body trembling but her eyes blazing. She stood tall, one hand on her belly, the other balled into a fist. "Looks like the rat's out of hiding," the scarred leader sneered, stepping forward. Angela's voice was steady, defiant. "You'll never bury the truth. Not now." The men closed in, circling like wolves. Angela braced herself, every muscle taut, ready to endure whatever came next. Because she knew Ethan was out there, alive, carrying the truth she could no longer protect alone. And that knowledge gave her strength even as the shadows swallowed her. Ethan ran. His heart hammered in his chest as he pushed himself through the narrow gap in the fence, scraping his arms against the rusted wire. He hit the ground hard on the other side, rolled, and scrambled to his feet. The alleys stretched before him, familiar paths he had walked countless nights. He could vanish here, hide until morning, survive the way he always had. That was what Angela wanted, what she had begged of him. But with every step he took away from her, the sound of her voice echoed in his head. "You saved me, you saved my baby, but now you have to save yourself." Ethan skidded to a stop, gasping. Rain dripped from his hair into his eyes, mixing with tears. Save himself? He could do that. He had done it for years. But leave her? Leave the only person who had ever looked at him like he mattered? "No," he whispered fiercely to the empty alley. "I won't." He turned and ran back the way he had come. The courtyard loomed ahead, dim in the gray light of dawn. He pressed himself against the fence, peering through the gap. His stomach lurched at the sight. Angela, bloodied and bruised, standing tall as the men circled her. The scarred leader sneered, his gun glinting in the faint light. "You should have stayed down, lady. Would have been easier." Angela lifted her chin, defiance blazing in her eyes. "I'll never stop." Ethan's small hands clenched around the jagged edge of the fence. He couldn't fight them head on, but he couldn't do nothing either. His gaze darted around the courtyard, searching. A pile of broken pallets, a loose pipe leaning against the wall, and his eyes widened a figure lurking in the shadows of a nearby building. At first, he thought it was another thug, but then the figure stepped into the faint light, and Ethan recognized him. Detective Paul Reynolds, Angela's old partner. Ethan had seen him once before, back when Angela had walked him through the precinct, introducing him as the only cop she truly trusted. Paul had seemed weary then, caught between duty and survival. Now he stood with his jaw set, a pistol in his hand, eyes locked on the gang. For a moment, Ethan's heart soared. Reinforcements. But Paul didn't move. He lingered in the shadows, watching, waiting. Why isn't he helping? Ethan thought desperately. Angela stumbled as one of the thugs shoved her to her knees. The scarred leader raised his gun, pressing it against her temple. Ethan's chest constricted. He couldn't wait for Paul. He couldn't wait for anyone. Grabbing the loose pipe, he slipped through the gap in the fence and crept along the wall, silent as he could. His heart thundered so loudly he was sure they would hear it. The scarred man cocked the gun. "Say goodbye." Ethan screamed. The sound ripped through the courtyard as he swung the pipe with all his strength, slamming it against the man's wrist. The gun clattered to the ground. Chaos erupted. Angela shoved herself forward, knocking another thug off balance. The gang cursed, turning on Ethan with murderous rage. "Get the kid," one shouted. But before they could close in, a gunshot split the air. One of the men dropped, clutching his leg, howling in pain. Paul Reynolds stepped from the shadows, his weapon raised. His voice rang out, hard and commanding. "Enough!" The men froze, torn between retreat and retaliation. Paul's eyes flicked to Angela, then to Ethan before returning to the gang. "Walk away while you still can. This ends tonight." "Ugh." The scarred leader snarled, cradling his injured wrist. "You don't scare me, Reynolds. You're just another cop who's in too deep." Paul's jaw tightened. Maybe, but I'm not letting you take her. For a heartbeat, the courtyard held its breath. Rain dripped from the rooftops, the air thick with tension. Then the men moved. Gunfire erupted. Angela dove for cover behind a stack of pallets, dragging Ethan with her. Splinters rained down as bullets chewed through the wood. Paul returned fire, his shots sharp and precise, forcing the gang to scatter. Ethan clung to Angela, his small body trembling. She held him close, shielding him as best she could. "Stay down," she shouted over the gunfire. "I'm sorry," he gasped. "I couldn't leave you." Her heart twisted even as fear clawed at her. She kissed the top of his wet hair. "Don't ever apologize for having courage." Paul's voice thundered across the courtyard. "Go, get out of here." Angela looked at him, torn. He was outnumbered, but his eyes blazed with determination. He was buying them time. She grabbed Ethan's hand, pulling him toward the far side of the courtyard. "Come on!" They sprinted toward a side door, bullets sparking off the walls around them. Ethan tripped, but Angela hauled him up, adrenaline lending her strength she didn't know she had left. Behind them, Paul's gun roared again and again, each shot echoing like a vow. They burst through the door into another alley, slamming it shut behind them. Angela leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. Ethan clung to her side, wide-eyed, his chest heaving. "Is he?" Ethan began. Angela shook her head. "We can't think about that now. We just have to keep moving." But deep inside, she prayed Paul would survive. He had chosen a side tonight, and it had cost him dearly. Ethan tugged at her sleeve. "Where do we go?" Angela scanned the alley, her mind racing. The precinct was compromised. The hospital was dangerous. But there was one place left, an old friend, a nurse named Sarah Miller, who had once owed Angela her life. If anyone would help them, it was her. "We head west," Angela said firmly. "There's someone we can trust." Ethan nodded, gripping her hand tightly. His fear was still there, raw and heavy, but beneath it burned the same stubborn courage that had brought him back. As they slipped into the maze of alleys once more, Angela glanced down at him. "You could have stayed safe," she whispered. Ethan looked up, his voice steady despite the tremor in his frame. "Safe doesn't matter if you're gone." Angela's throat tightened. She squeezed his hand, a silent vow forming in her heart. She would protect him. Somehow, she would get them both through this. The dawn broke fully as they disappeared into the city, the storm finally easing. But the war was far from over. The sun finally broke through the clouds as Angela and Ethan made their way west, though the light felt more like a curse than a blessing. The night storm had left the city drenched, puddles shining like mirrors across cracked pavement. With daylight came exposure, and exposure meant danger. Angela kept her coat pulled tight, her hood drawn low. Each step was heavy, her bruises screaming in protest, but she pushed forward. Ethan walked at her side, small hand gripping hers firmly, his eyes darting around every corner. For a boy his age, he was far too alert, far too ready to run at the first sign of threat. They stuck to side streets, weaving through alleys and cutting across vacant lots until the towering bulk of Mercy General Hospital came into view. But Angela didn't lead him through the main entrance. Instead, she guided him to a narrow service door around the back, half hidden by dumpsters. "Here," she whispered, knocking softly in a rhythm only someone inside would recognize. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open, revealing a woman in scrubs, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun. Her sharp blue eyes widened at the sight of Angela. "Good Lord," Sarah Miller breathed. "What have you gotten yourself into this time?" Angela managed a weak smile. "Always straight to the point, Sarah." "I know." Sarah ushered them inside quickly, locking the door behind them. The narrow hallway smelled of disinfectant and coffee. "You look like hell," she muttered, slipping an arm around Angela to support her. "Feels about right," Angela replied, wincing as Sarah helped her onto a nearby bench. Sarah turned her gaze to Ethan, who stood stiffly by the door, clutching his worn backpack. "And who's this?" "My partner tonight," Angela said softly, giving Ethan a reassuring nod. He saved my life. Ethan ducked his head, embarrassed. Sarah's expression softened. Well then, you're a brave one. Come on, both of you. Let's get you patched up. They followed Sarah through a maze of corridors until they reached a small supply room, tucked away in a quiet wing. Sarah closed the blinds and set about gathering supplies: gauze, antiseptic, bandages. Angela sat stiffly on the edge of a cot as Sarah cleaned her cuts, the sting sharp but bearable. Ethan hovered close, his eyes never leaving Angela. You're lucky, Sarah muttered as she worked. Ribs bruised but not broken. Cuts and swelling, but no fractures I can see. And the baby? Angela's hand instinctively moved to her belly. Still moving, still fighting. Sarah gave her a long look. Like mother, like child. Ethan smiled faintly at that, though his eyes were still shadowed with worry. When Sarah finished, she leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. All right, Moore. Out with it. Who's after you this time? Angela hesitated. Trust was a dangerous currency these days. But Sarah had once risked her job to smuggle medical supplies for Angela during an undercover sting. If there was anyone she could trust, it was her. It's bigger than before, Angela admitted quietly. I've got proof, real proof that Hayes and a few others are on the take. They're working with gangs, letting them run the streets. And now they're trying to silence me before I go public. Sarah's face pallid. Richard Hayes? Captain Hayes? Angela nodded grimly. He's not who he pretends to be. Oh. Ethan's small voice broke the silence. He's the one who sent those men after you. Sarah's gaze flicked to the boy, then back to Angela. And you're planning to expose him? I don't have a choice, Angela said firmly. But I can't do it alone. They'll bury me before I reach the press. Sarah chewed her lip, then straightened. You'll have to move fast. If Hayes catches wind that you're still alive, he'll tighten the net, and he's got people here too. Doctors, orderlies, people who owe him favors. Angela's stomach clenched. Even here, there was no real safety. Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice. But there's someone you might trust, a reporter. Name's Daniel Price. He's been digging into police corruption for months. If you get him your evidence, he'll take it public. Angela's pulse quickened. Hope, fragile but real, flickered to life. Where do I find him? He's got a small office downtown. Old newspaper building, 3rd floor. Not exactly high security, but he's careful. Sarah's eyes softened. You get him the files, Angela, and this whole rotten mess comes crashing down. Ethan perked up. Then let's go now. Angela reached over, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. We will. But we have to be smart. Sarah frowned. Smart doesn't change the fact you're bleeding and 7 months pregnant. You can't keep running forever. Angela's gaze hardened. I don't need forever, just long enough. Later, when Sarah stepped out to fetch food, Ethan finally spoke. Angela, why do you keep fighting? You could have walked away a long time ago. Why risk everything? Angela studied him, the weight of the question pressing deep. Because if I don't, who will? If good people stay quiet, the bad ones win. And then kids like you never stand a chance. Ethan looked down, silent. Then, quietly, I used to think nobody cared, that I was invisible. Angela reached for his hand, her voice soft but fierce. You're not invisible, Ethan. You matter. And after this is over, I'll make sure you never feel that way again. His eyes shimmered in the dim light, but he nodded. Their fragile moment was shattered by the sudden slam of a door somewhere down the hall. Voices followed deep, commanding, too harsh to belong to hospital staff. Ethan's head snapped up. They're here. Angela's heart lurched. Hayes's men had found them. Sarah rushed back into the room, her face pale. You've got to go. Now. They're searching every wing. Angela pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the pain. Which way? Follow me, Sarah hissed, already moving toward a back stairwell. They slipped into the hall, keeping low. Shouts echoed nearby, the sound of boots pounding on tile. Sarah led them down a narrow staircase to the basement, the air damp and cold. This way, she whispered, guiding them through the maze of pipes and storage rooms. But as they neared the exit, voices rose ahead. More men, trapped again. Angela grabbed Ethan, pulling him behind a stack of crates. Her pulse raced as shadows stretched closer. Sarah cursed under her breath. They've covered every exit. Angela's mind raced. She could fight, but not win. Not like this. Then she remembered Daniel Price. The only way forward was through. She turned to Sarah, her eyes fierce. I need you to take Ethan. Get him to Price. Tell him everything. Ethan's face blanched. No, I'm not leaving you again. Angela cupped his face, her voice breaking. Ethan, listen to me. If they take me, the evidence dies with me. But if you get to Price, we win. Do you understand? We win. Tears welled in his eyes, but he nodded reluctantly. I'll come back for you, I promise. Angela kissed his forehead, her heart aching. I know you will. Sarah grabbed Ethan's hand, pulling him toward a narrow service tunnel. Come on, kid. Angela turned back toward the approaching voices, her fists clenched, her body braced. She would hold them off. For Ethan, for her child, for the truth. As Sarah and Ethan disappeared into the shadows, Angela faced the storm once more, her spirit unbroken. The tunnel smelled of rust and damp stone, every step echoing faintly in the narrow passage. Sarah held a flashlight in one hand and Ethan's wrist in the other, pulling him forward with brisk determination. Ethan stumbled at times, his small legs struggling to keep pace, but he never asked her to slow down. His mind was fixed on one thing, Angela's face when she told him to go. If you get to Price, we win. The words repeated in his head, steadying his resolve. Where are we going? Ethan whispered, his voice bouncing off the concrete walls. Old service exit, Sarah murmured. It'll get us near Jefferson Avenue. From there, we catch a bus downtown. With luck, we'll reach Price before Hayes's men know we're gone. Ethan nodded, though unease gnawed at him. He didn't like leaving Angela behind, not when she was hurt and pregnant. But Sarah's grip was firm, her stride certain. He had no choice but to trust her. At last, they emerged into the gray light of morning. The city buzzed with early traffic, horns blaring, vendors setting up stalls, people rushing to work. It felt like another world compared to the shadows they just fled. Sarah adjusted her scrubs and tugged Ethan's hood low. Keep your head down. Blend in. Ethan mimicked her posture, stuffing his hands into his pockets. To anyone watching, they might look like a tired nurse escorting her younger brother. Nothing more. Meanwhile, back in the hospital, Angela braced herself against the cold wall of the basement as heavy footsteps approached. Her breathing was ragged, each inhale sharp with pain, but her eyes blazed with defiance. The scarred leader stepped into view, flanked by two armed men. His wrist was still wrapped from Ethan's blow earlier, but his grin was cruel. Well, well, he drawled. You're tougher than I gave you credit for. Thought you'd be long gone by now. And Angela straightened, one hand on her belly, the other balled into a fist. You'll have to do better if you think I'm going down easy. The men chuckled darkly. The leader tilted his head. Hayes wants you alive for now. But me? I don't mind if you come along broken. Angela's heart pounded, but she forced herself to smirk. Funny, you don't look like the type who makes his own decisions. The grin faded. His eyes hardened. Careful, lady. He motioned to his men. Take her. Angela lunged first. Pain seared through her ribs, but adrenaline carried her. She grabbed a metal pipe from the floor and swung it, striking one man across the shoulder. He cried out, stumbling back. The other rushed her, but Angela drove her knee into his gut before he could grab her. The impact nearly toppled her too, but she held her ground. For a moment, the scarred leader just watched, amused by her resistance. Then he drew his pistol, leveling it at her chest. Enough games, and Angela's grip tightened on the pipe, her breath ragged. If this was it, she would go down fighting. Across the city, Sarah and Ethan boarded a crowded bus heading downtown. The air inside was thick with the smell of wet coats and stale perfume. Sarah sat near the back, keeping Ethan close beside her. He pressed his forehead against the glass, watching the city blur past. His thoughts were a storm of worry for Angela. "Do you think she'll be okay?" he asked quietly. Sarah hesitated before answering. "Angela's the strongest woman I know. If anyone can survive this, it's her." Ethan nodded, but doubt lingered in his eyes. As the bus rumbled on, Sarah pulled a folded envelope from her bag and slipped it into Ethan's hands. "This is what Angela gave me, the evidence. You keep it close. Don't let anyone take it." Ethan opened it just enough to glimpse the papers inside, photocopies of bank records, surveillance photos, names he didn't recognize. To him, it was just paper. But Angela had nearly died for it. "I won't lose it," he said firmly, tucking it under his shirt. Sarah gave him a small smile. "That's the spirit." Back at the hospital, chaos erupted. A sudden burst of gunfire rattled through the basement. The scarred leader spun around, shouting orders as bullets tore into the walls. From the shadows emerged Detective Paul Reynolds, limping but alive, his pistol blazing. "Angela," he barked. "Move." Angela didn't hesitate. She swung the pipe once more, knocking the nearest thug off balance, then darted toward Paul. Pain lanced through her side, but she pushed through, adrenaline carrying her. Paul covered her retreat, his shots precise despite his limp. The scarred leader cursed, retreating behind cover as his men dragged him back. Angela stumbled against Paul's shoulder, gasping. "You're still alive." "Not for long if we don't move," he grunted. "Come on." Together they vanished into the maze of the hospital, leaving the shouts of fury behind. The bus ride felt endless, but eventually Sarah and Ethan stepped off near an old brick building with faded lettering. Detroit Chronicle. Ethan craned his neck, staring up at the weathered facade. "He works here." Sarah nodded. "Daniel Price. If he's not here, he'll be nearby. Stay close." They climbed the creaking stairs to the third floor. Sarah knocked twice, then pushed open a door labeled with peeling paint. Inside, the office was cluttered with stacks of newspapers, file boxes, and the smell of burnt coffee. At a battered desk sat a man in his 40s, hair graying at the temples, his shirt wrinkled from too many sleepless nights. He looked up sharply as they entered. "Sarah!" His eyes flicked to Ethan, then widened. "What the hell?" "No time," Sarah cut him off. "This is Angela Moore's boy. Well, the boy who saved her. Angela sent him with something for you." Daniel's gaze sharpened. "Angela's alive?" Ethan stepped forward, pulling the envelope from under his shirt. "She said to give you this." Daniel took it with trembling hands, flipping through the papers. His eyes widened as he scanned the contents. "Good God, this is everything. This will bury Hayes." Ethan's chest swelled with pride, though fear lingered. "Then you'll help her?" Daniel looked at him, then at Sarah, his jaw set. "I'll do more than help. I'll make sure the whole city knows the truth." But even as hope flickered in that cluttered office, danger loomed. Hayes had resources, connections, and men who would stop at nothing to protect him. Angela was still on the run, Paul bleeding and limping beside her. And Ethan, just a boy, was now the keeper of the secret that could topple a captain of police. The battle was far from over. The office of the Detroit Chronicle felt like a different world, dusty, cluttered, alive with the smell of ink and coffee. Daniel Price paced back and forth, the envelope clutched in his hand. His eyes scanned the documents again and again, each line confirming what Angela had risked her life to uncover. Sarah stood near the door, arms crossed, while Ethan perched on the edge of a chair, restless energy radiating from him. "This isn't just corruption," Daniel muttered, shaking his head. "This is a web. Payoffs, cover-ups, whole cases buried. Hayes has half the city in his pocket." Then you'll print it?" Sarah asked. Daniel stopped pacing, his jaw tight. "I can't just print it. If I run this without backup, they'll shut us down before the ink's dry. I need verification, statements, witnesses." Ethan leaned forward, his voice urgent. "Angela's your witness. She's got everything in her head." Daniel studied him. The boy's clothes were ragged, his face still streaked with dirt, but his eyes burned with conviction. "You care about her," Daniel said quietly. Ethan's jaw tightened. She saved me first. Now I gotta save her. Daniel looked down at the envelope again. Then we move fast. If Hayes knows she's still alive, he'll tighten the noose. I'll call a friend at the state attorney's office, someone outside Hayes's reach, but it'll take time. Sarah exhaled sharply. Time is the one thing Angela doesn't have. Across the city, Angela staggered through the back corridors of the hospital, leaning heavily on Paul Reynolds. His limp was worsening, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage on his thigh, but he pressed forward without complaint. We can't stay here, Angela muttered, her breath shallow. No kidding, Paul grunted, shouldering open a door that led them into a dimly lit stairwell. Where's your friend Sarah? She's gone, took the boy. Relief softened Angela's tone. They're safer away from me. Paul shot her a look. You sure about that? Hayes doesn't leave loose ends. Angela's stomach clenched. The thought of Ethan in Hayes's crosshairs made her blood run cold. But she forced herself to believe in Sarah. The nurse was clever, resourceful. She would get Ethan to safety. Still, unease gnawed at her as they climbed the stairs. At the roof, Paul pushed open the heavy door, and a gust of cold air hit them. The city stretched below, glittering in the pale light of morning. Angela pulled her coat tighter around her, shivering. Paul guided her toward the far side, where a fire escape zigzagged down the wall. We'll take this. Too risky to use the streets. Angela gripped the railing, her body trembling from exhaustion. Every movement was a battle. She thought of her child, of Ethan, of the truth she still carried. She couldn't stop now. Back at the Chronicle, Daniel sat at his desk, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, I have the documents. No, I won't hand them over until I see you in person. Meet me at the courthouse at noon and bring protection. We're not playing games anymore. He hung up, rubbing his temples. His gaze shifted to Ethan. Kid, you did something brave, but bravery puts a target on your back. You understand that, right? Ethan nodded solemnly. I've had a target on me since I was born. Doesn't matter. What matters is Angela. Sarah touched Daniel's arm. You'll help her? Daniel gave a short nod. I'll help her. But first, we get this evidence locked down where Hayes can't reach it. After that, we go public. Ethan's chest swelled with determination. Then I'm going with you. Daniel hesitated, then sighed. All right, but you do exactly as I say. Angela and Paul reached the bottom of the fire escape, their legs nearly giving out. They slipped into a deserted alley, the city's noise muffled around them. Paul leaned heavily against the wall, his face pale. We need to find wheels. Can't keep running on foot. Angela scanned the street. Too risky to steal a car. Hayes has patrols everywhere. Paul gave a grim smile. When did you get so cautious? Angela shot him a tired look. Pregnancy changes priorities. Oh. Despite the dire situation, Paul chuckled. The sound was rough, but it lifted her spirits, if only for a moment. Then a shout rang out behind them. More. Angela spun, her heart lurching. Two men in plain clothes stormed into the alley, guns drawn. Paul shoved her behind a dumpster. Run! No. Run! Damn it. Gunfire erupted. Paul returned fire, his shots echoing between the brick walls. Angela clutched her belly, forcing her legs to move, ducking through a side passage as bullets sparked against the concrete. She stumbled into another street, breath ragged, eyes darting wildly for cover. Sirens wailed in the distance, the city suddenly alive with danger. She was hunted, bleeding, but not broken. Not yet. At the Chronicle, Daniel packed the documents into a locked briefcase. We move now, he said firmly. Courthouse, noon. If Hayes tries to stop us, at least we'll be in the open. Sarah frowned. And Angela? Daniel hesitated. If she's alive, she'll find us. If not, he didn't finish. Ethan slammed his small fist against the desk. Don't say that. She's alive. I know she is. Daniel studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. All right, kid, let's bet on her. Angela's flight through the city blurred into a haze of alleys and shadows. At last, she collapsed against a brick wall, gasping for breath. Her vision swam, but she forced herself upright. For her child, For Ethan, for the truth. She pressed forward, disappearing into the heartbeat of Detroit as the hunt closed in. The courthouse loomed tall against the skyline, its stone pillars catching the weak midday sun. People bustled across the steps, lawyers with briefcases, clerks balancing stacks of files, citizens summoned for hearings. To anyone else, it was an ordinary morning. But for Daniel Price, Sarah Miller, and Ethan Walker, every step toward that building felt like walking into a battlefield. Daniel clutched the locked briefcase to his chest as if it contained the weight of the entire city. In a way, it did. The documents inside could burn Hayes's empire to the ground, but only if they survived long enough to deliver them. "Stay close," Daniel murmured to Sarah and Ethan. His eyes swept the crowd, searching for threats. "My contact will meet us at the side entrance, neutral ground." Ethan's stomach churned with nerves, but he kept his chin up. Angela had trusted him to carry the evidence this far. He wouldn't falter now. They reached the side steps just as a man in a gray suit approached, his stride brisk, his face familiar from old press conferences. Assistant District Attorney Michael Harrington. Daniel's shoulders eased slightly. "That's him," he whispered. Harrington extended his hand. "Daniel, Sarah, and you must be the boy." His smile was polite, almost too polished. Daniel shook his hand firmly. "You're clean, right? Hayes doesn't own you?" Harrington's expression darkened. "If he did, I wouldn't be here. Let's get inside before someone notices." They moved toward the entrance, but before they reached the doors, two uniformed officers stepped in their path. "Hold up," one barked. "What's in the case?" Daniel's pulse spiked. "Official documents for the DA's office." The officer's eyes narrowed. "We'll take a look." Sarah tensed, pulling Ethan closer. Harrington stepped forward, flashing his badge. "They're with me. It's authorized." For a moment, the officers hesitated. Then slowly, they stepped aside. Daniel exhaled as they pushed through the doors into the marble-floored lobby. "Too close," he muttered. But Ethan couldn't shake the cold knot forming in his stomach. The officer's hesitation, Harrington's overly smooth smile, something felt wrong. Meanwhile, across the city, Angela staggered down a rain-slick alley, her strength nearly gone. She pressed one hand to her ribs, the other to her belly, whispering softly to the child within. "Just hold on," she murmured. "We're almost through." But the city seemed determined to crush her. Every corner held shadows. Every sound of footsteps sent her heart racing. She had no weapon, no allies at her side. Paul had been separated during the firefight, and she didn't know if he lived or died. For the first time, true despair seeped into her bones. Maybe this was the end. Then, faintly, she heard church bells. A steady, ringing sound carried on the breeze. Angela lifted her head, her eyes focusing on the spire in the distance. A church. A place of refuge, if only for a moment. With the last of her strength, she pushed herself toward it. At the courthouse, Harrington led Daniel, Sarah, and Ethan into a small conference room tucked away from the main hall. The blinds were drawn, the air heavy with the smell of old coffee. "All right," Harrington said, motioning to the table. "Let's see it." Daniel hesitated. His instincts screamed caution, but time was short. He set the briefcase down and unlocked it, spreading the documents across the table. Harrington leaned over, scanning the files with a sharp eye. Bank records, surveillance photos. Hayes's signature, clear as day. "This is dynamite." Ethan watched him closely, unease growing. Harrington's hands lingered on the papers too long, his smile curving just a little too wide. Daniel noticed it too. "You're not here to help us, are you?" he said slowly. Harrington straightened, his smile never faltering. "You're smart, Price. Too smart for your own good." The door slammed open. Two officers stormed in, guns drawn. Sarah gasped, pulling Ethan back. Daniel reached for the briefcase, but Harrington snatched the top folder, tucking it under his arm. "Captain Hayes sends his regards," Harrington said smoothly. Ethan's blood ran cold. Betrayal. Angela pushed open the heavy doors of the church, collapsing into the dim, candlelit sanctuary. The scent of incense and old wood filled her lungs as she dragged herself to a pew. A priest hurried forward, his face lined with concern. "My child, you're hurt." "Please," Angela whispered, her voice breaking. "Lock the doors. Don't let them in." He obeyed, bolting the doors before kneeling beside her. Angela leaned against the wooden pew, her body trembling. For the first time, she allowed herself to weep. Not from pain, but from the crushing weight of it all. Ethan, the baby, the evidence, the endless pursuit. "God," she whispered through tears, "if you're listening, don't let me fail them." The priest placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You have more strength than you know." But outside, footsteps echoed on the church steps. The hunt was closing in again. Back in the courthouse, chaos erupted. Daniel shoved the briefcase toward Sarah. "Run!" Gunfire split the air as Harrington's men advanced. Sarah grabbed Ethan's hand and bolted through the side door, clutching the briefcase. Bullets ricocheted off the marble walls as they sprinted down the hall. Ethan's lungs burned, but he refused to let go of Sarah's hand. Angela was out there somewhere, and he couldn't fail her. Behind them, Harrington shouted orders. "Don't let them leave the building." In the church, Angela rose shakily to her feet as the doors shuddered under pounding fists. The priest looked at her, fear in his eyes. "They'll break through." Angela gripped the pew for balance, her body screaming with every movement. "Then we make them fight for it." She was battered, bleeding, and alone. But as the doors cracked and the shadows pressed closer, she squared her shoulders. If this was her last stand, she would make it count. The heavy wooden doors of the church shook under the force of fists and boots. Each thud echoed through the sanctuary, rattling the stained glass windows and making the candles flicker. Angela stood in the aisle, her hand braced against a pew for balance, her swollen belly and battered body a stark reminder of how fragile she was, but her eyes burned with determination. The priest lingered near the altar, wringing his hands. "Child, they will break through. You must hide." Angela shook her head. No more hiding. The lock finally splintered, the doors burst open, and 3 men stormed inside, weapons raised. Their eyes darted over the dim sanctuary until they landed on her. "There she is," one snarled. Angela gripped the iron candlestick she had taken from the altar, raising it like a club. The men sneered, confident in their guns. But Angela moved first. With a roar, she swung the candlestick into the nearest thug's arm, knocking his gun wide. The weapon discharged, the shot deafening inside the church. Glass shattered, and the priest cried out in terror. Angela shoved the thug backward, then ducked behind a pew as bullets tore through the wood. Splinters rained down, stinging her skin. Her breath came hard and fast, but she forced herself to stay focused. "For Ethan, for my baby." She grabbed a fallen hymn book and hurled it at one man's face, startling him just long enough to lunge forward and strike his knee with the candlestick. He howled, collapsing. The third man advanced, gun steady. Angela froze, her body screaming in protest. Then the priest stepped forward, holding up a heavy brass cross. "Leave this place," he shouted. His voice trembled, but it was enough to draw the thug's attention. Angela seized the moment. She charged, slamming the candlestick into his wrist. The gun clattered to the floor, skidding under a pew. She kicked it away before collapsing to her knees, gasping. 2 men were still standing, furious and humiliated. One raised his pistol, aiming squarely at her chest. Angela closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer. A shot rang out, but it wasn't his. The thug dropped, clutching his shoulder, as Paul Reynolds limped into the sanctuary, pistol smoking in his hand. His face was pale, his limp worse than before, but his eyes locked on Angela with fierce determination. "Guess I'm not done yet," he rasped. The remaining thug turned his gun on Paul, but Angela swung the candlestick again, smashing it into his ribs. He collapsed beside the pew, groaning. Silence followed, broken only by Angela's ragged breaths and the priest's whispered prayers. Paul staggered forward, holstering his weapon. "We need to move. Hayes won't stop sending them." Angela nodded weakly, gripping the pew to stand. She was exhausted, every muscle trembling, but she refused to fall. Across the city, the courthouse erupted in chaos. Sarah and Ethan raced down the marble steps, the locked briefcase bouncing against Sarah's hip. Behind them, shouts and gunfire echoed. "Keep running," Sarah urged, her voice sharp with fear. Ethan's lungs burned, his small legs struggling to keep up, but he clung to her hand. The papers Angela had risked everything for were still with them. They couldn't lose them now. They burst through a side exit into the blinding daylight. The plaza outside teemed with people, lawyers, reporters, passers-by. For a brief moment, Sarah felt relief. Crowds meant witnesses, witnesses meant protection. But then she spotted Harrington at the top of the steps, flanked by officers in Hayes's pocket. His eyes locked on the briefcase. "There," he shouted. "Stop them." The crowd erupted in panic as officers surged forward. Sarah shoved Ethan ahead of her, forcing their way through the massive bodies. People screamed, scattering in all directions. Ethan stumbled but kept moving, his small frame slipping between startled adults. Sarah fought to keep up, her heart pounding. "Go to the fountain," she yelled. "Meet me there." Ethan nodded, darting through the chaos. He reached the fountain at the center of the plaza, ducking behind the stone edge as bullets cracked overhead. His chest heaved, but he clutched the papers tighter under his shirt. Sarah wasn't so lucky. One officer grabbed her arm, yanking her back. The briefcase tumbled to the ground. She kicked wildly, screaming, "Run, Ethan!" The boy obeyed. With the papers hidden on him, he bolted from the fountain, vanishing into the panicked crowd. Harrington's furious voice carried over the chaos. "Find that boy, now!" Back at the church, Angela leaned heavily on Paul as they slipped out a side door into the alley. Her body was near collapse, but her spirit blazed. "We need to find Ethan," she whispered. Paul nodded grimly. "If Hayes knows about the boy, he'll throw everything at him." Angela's stomach clenched. Her child shifted inside her, as if reminding her what was at stake. She couldn't fail not Ethan, not her baby, not the truth. Together, bruised and bleeding, they limped into the daylight, knowing the battle was far from over. Across Detroit, three paths now converged. Angela, battered but unbroken, searching desperately for the boy who had saved her life. Ethan, alone in a city of enemies, carrying the truth that could topple a captain. Daniel Price, caught in a web of betrayal, now racing against time to expose Hayes before it was too late. And somewhere in the shadows, Captain Richard Hayes pulled the strings, tightening his grip on a city that was beginning to slip from his control. The storm was not over. It was only gathering strength. Ethan ran until his lungs burned, weaving through the chaos of the courthouse plaza. The crowd scattered in every direction. Sirens wailed, and shouts of "Stop that boy!" rang out behind him. But he kept running, clutching the hidden papers tight under his shirt. He darted down a side street, past honking cars and startled pedestrians. His thin frame allowed him to slip through gaps others couldn't, but fear pressed down on him like a weight. He was alone now. Sarah had been caught, Daniel was missing, and Angela, his Angela, was somewhere out there, fighting for her life. Ethan ducked into an alley, his chest heaving. He pressed himself against the wall, listening. Boots thundered nearby, the sound of officers searching. He crouched low, forcing his breath to quiet. A stray cat hissed from under a dumpster, startling him. Ethan bit his lip, willing himself to stay calm. He couldn't get caught. Angela had trusted him. "If you get to Price, we win." But Price was gone, Sarah was gone, and Ethan didn't even know where to go. All he knew was that Hayes's men would tear the city apart to find him. Across town, Angela and Paul moved slowly through back streets, every step an effort. Paul's limp was worse now, blood seeping through his makeshift bandage, but he refused to stop. "We need to get you help," Angela muttered. He shook his head. "Later. Right now, the kid." Angela's heart clenched. Ethan was out there alone, carrying the evidence, being hunted by men twice his size. She could almost feel his small hand in hers again, hear his voice telling her not to give up. "We'll find him," she whispered fiercely. "We have to." Paul gave her a sharp look. If Hayes gets to him first, he won't. Angela cut him off. Her voice shook, but her eyes were steel. I won't let him. Ethan slipped deeper into the city, dodging patrol cars and ducking behind dumpsters when footsteps drew near. Hunger gnawed at him, exhaustion pressed on him, but he pushed forward. At last, he stumbled into an old rail yard on the city's edge. Rusted boxcars lined the tracks, weeds pushing through cracked pavement. It was quiet, abandoned, perfect for hiding. He crawled into one of the empty cars and collapsed against the cold metal wall. For the first time since the chase began, he let himself cry. His small shoulders shook, tears mixing with grime on his cheeks. I can't do this, he whispered to the darkness. I'm just a kid. But then he felt the papers crinkling against his chest, and he remembered Angela's words. You matter, you saved us both. He wiped his tears roughly, forcing himself to sit straighter. I'll make it, he said aloud, as if daring the world to prove him wrong. Angela and Paul stopped at a payphone outside a shuttered diner. Paul dug out a few coins and dialed an old contact, an informant who worked the streets. Any word on the boy? Paul asked, voice tense. On the other end, a gravelly voice replied, Cops are tearing up downtown looking for some kid. Word is he slipped through at the courthouse. Smart little ghost. Angela's heart leapt. He was alive. Where would he go? She pressed. Last I heard, they spotted a kid near the old rail yard. Oh. Angela didn't wait for Paul to hang up. She grabbed his arm. That's where we're going. Paul grimaced, but nodded. Back at the rail yard, Ethan stirred at the sound of crunching gravel. He froze, straining to listen. Voices carried faintly on the wind. Search the cars. He's here somewhere. Ethan's blood ran cold. Hayes's men. He crawled deeper into the boxcar, pressing himself against the far wall. His small body trembled, but he forced himself silent as heavy boots clanged against the tracks outside. Check this one, a man barked. The door screeched as it slid open, light spilling into the dark car. Ethan held his breath, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure they'd hear it. A flashlight beam swept across the interior, landing inches from his face. There's nothing, another voice muttered. The door slammed shut. Ethan exhaled shakily, tears of relief stinging his eyes. But he knew it was only a matter of time before they checked again. He had to move. Angela and Paul reached the edge of the rail yard just as dusk began to fall. The sky glowed orange, shadows stretching long across the tracks. Angela's eyes scanned the rows of boxcars, desperation gnawing at her. Ethan, she whispered urgently. Paul grabbed her arm. Quiet. If he's here, Hayes's men are too. As if on cue, shouts echoed across the yard. Angela's stomach clenched. Paul raised his pistol. We'll draw them off. You find the boy. No, Angela said firmly. We stick together. Paul opened his mouth to argue, but the sound of running feet cut him off. They ducked behind a rusted car as two thugs jogged past, their flashlights sweeping the shadows. Angela's pulse raced. She had to reach Ethan before they did. Inside the boxcar, Ethan heard the voices grow closer. Panic surged through him. He clutched the papers tight and crawled toward the small gap at the far end of the car. With effort, he squeezed through, dropping onto the gravel below. He hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his knees, but he scrambled up and ran. His small figure darted between the boxcars, heart pounding. Over there, someone shouted. Flashlights swung toward him. Boots thundered behind. Ethan sprinted blindly, his lungs burning, until a familiar voice cut through the night. Ethan. He skidded to a stop, eyes wide. Through the shadows, Angela emerged, limping but fierce, her arms open. Angela, he cried, tears streaming down his face. She pulled him into her arms, clutching him as if she'd never let go. I've got you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I've got you. Paul covered them, firing warning shots into the air. The thugs scattered back, regrouping in the distance. Angela pulled away just enough to look Ethan in the eyes. You did it. You kept it safe. He nodded, chest heaving. I thought I couldn't, but I remembered what you said. Angela's heart swelled with pride, even as fear tightened around them again. Hayes's men weren't done not yet. But for the first time in hours, she felt whole again. They were together. And together, they would fight. The rail yard was no longer silent. Shouts echoed across the rusted cars, flashlights slicing through the gathering dark. Hayes's men fanned out, their boots crunching on gravel, weapons glinting in the fading light. Angela held Ethan close, her battered body trembling but her resolve unshaken. Paul stood at her side, pistol raised despite his limp, his jaw set in grim determination. They were cornered but not beaten. Ethan's small voice trembled. "Angela, there's too many." She knelt, cupping his face, her eyes blazing with fierce love. "Listen to me. You're not alone anymore. We fight together." He nodded, swallowing his fear. Paul glanced around. "We need higher ground, that tower." He pointed to an old signal tower at the edge of the yard. From there, they could see every approach, maybe even buy time until help arrived if help was still coming. Angela nodded. "Move." They sprinted across the gravel, Angela half-dragging Ethan, Paul covering their retreat with sharp bursts of gunfire. Bullets sparked off the steel cars, ricocheting in the night. "Keep going," Paul barked. They reached the base of the tower. Angela pushed Ethan up the ladder first, her own breath ragged as she followed. Paul brought up the rear, grimacing with each step, but refusing to stop. At the top, they collapsed into the small control room. Dust coated every surface, and broken glass littered the floor, but it gave them a vantage point. Angela peered out the window. "They're surrounding us," she muttered. Paul reloaded his pistol with shaking hands. "Then we make this our line." Ethan crouched beside them, clutching the crinkled papers under his shirt. He felt small, scared, but he also felt something else. Determination. He had carried the truth this far. He wouldn't let it end here. Below, the scarred leader emerged, barking orders. His wrist was still bound from Ethan's earlier strike, but his fury burned hotter than ever. "Light it up," he shouted. Men opened fire on the tower, bullets shredding the wood and rattling the old steel. Angela pulled Ethan to the floor, shielding him with her body. Dust rained down as holes appeared in the walls. Paul fired back through a broken window, forcing the men to scatter. "We won't last long up here," he yelled. Angela's mind raced. They needed more than bullets. They needed the truth to reach beyond this yard. Her eyes fell on the old radio equipment in the corner, dusty, broken, but maybe not useless. "Ethan," she said urgently, "see if you can get that working." He blinked. "Me? You're quick. You're smart. Just try. If we can send a signal, Price will know we're alive." Ethan scrambled to the console, his small fingers brushing away dust. He didn't know radios, but he knew survival. He twisted knobs, flipped switches, listening for even the faintest crackle. Below, the scarred leader's voice rang out. "Bring them down!" The first Molotov sailed through the air, smashing against the tower's base. Flames licked upward, smoke curling into the night. The wood groaned, heat rising fast. "We don't have time," Paul shouted. Angela crawled to Ethan, gripping his shoulder. "Anything?" Static hissed from the speaker. Then faintly a voice. "Testing, Channel 3. Ethan's eyes lit up. "I got something." Angela grabbed the microphone. "This is Officer Angela Moore. We are under attack at the East Rail Yard. Hayes is dirty. Repeat. Captain Richard Hayes is working with gangs. We have evidence. Send help." The line crackled. No reply. Angela's heart sank. Then faintly, "Copy that, Moore. Hold your position. Units en route." Relief surged through her. Help was coming. But below, the scarred leader sneered. "Burn it all." Flames climbed higher, smoke choking the air inside the tower. Ethan coughed, his small body trembling. Angela pulled him close, shielding his face. "We have to get out," Paul rasped. Angela nodded, scanning the yard. The men were tightening the circle, but there was one gap, the old service gate, half collapsed. If they could break through, they might reach the streets. "On my signal," she whispered. Paul gave a grim smile. "Always did like your signals." "Oh." She grabbed Ethan's hand, locking eyes with him. "Stay with me. No matter what. He squeezed back. I'm not letting go. Angela kicked open the door. Smoke poured out as they charged down the ladder, bullets whizzing past. Paul fired relentlessly, buying precious seconds. They hit the ground running, sprinting toward the gate. Stop them, the scarred leader roared. Thugs surged forward, but Angela swung the candlestick she still carried, striking one down. Ethan hurled a rock at another's face, his small act of defiance sparking chaos. Paul emptied his last magazine, his shots sharp and deadly. The gate loomed ahead, but the scarred leader blocked their path, his gun raised, his eyes locked on Angela. It ends here, he snarled. Angela pushed Ethan behind her own body trembling but unyielding. Not tonight. The leader sneered and pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. Angela surged forward, slamming the candlestick into his jaw. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Go, she shouted. They burst through the gate just as sirens wailed in the distance. Police cruisers roared into the yard, lights blazing. Hayes's men scattered, but too late. Angela collapsed to her knees, clutching Ethan. We made it, she whispered. Ethan pressed his face into her shoulder, tears streaming. I knew you would. Paul leaned against the fence, bleeding but grinning. Told you we'd hold the line. Lena. For the first time in what felt like forever, Angela allowed herself to believe it. They had survived the storm. But deep down, she knew the fight wasn't over. Hayes still held power, still pulled strings. The evidence had to reach the public, and until it did, none of them were safe. Yet as she held Ethan in her arms, feeling the steady kick of her unborn child, Angela felt something stronger than fear. Hope. And hope was a weapon no one could take from her. The storm that had raged over Detroit was finally breaking. Days had passed since the night at the rail yard, but the echoes of gunfire and smoke still lingered in Angela's mind. She sat in a hospital bed now, her ribs bandaged, her swollen belly shifting as her child reminded her with gentle kicks that life went on. Ethan sat in a chair beside her, legs swinging nervously. He hadn't left her side since the ambulance carried them away. His clothes were cleaner now, his hair trimmed by a kindly nurse, but his eyes still held the weight of everything he had endured. Paul Reynolds leaned against the wall, his leg in a brace, a cup of bad hospital coffee in his hand. He looked tired, older than his years, but there was a glint of quiet satisfaction in his eyes. The television mounted on the wall hummed with the evening news. Daniel Price's voice carried across the room, steady and certain. And today, following the release of overwhelming evidence, Captain Richard Hayes was taken into custody on charges of corruption, racketeering, and conspiracy with organized crime. The city reels from the revelations, but tonight, justice has finally begun to take root. Angela closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. It was real. The truth had broken through. Hayes's empire was crumbling, his allies scattering. For the first time in months, she felt the weight on her chest ease. Ethan leaned forward. We did it, he whispered. Angela opened her eyes and smiled softly at him. No, Ethan, you did it. Without you, none of this would have happened. His cheeks flushed, but he shook his head. I was just there. You were brave, Angela said firmly. You saved me. You saved my baby, and you carried the truth when no one else could. Don't ever forget that. Paul grunted in agreement. Kid's got more guts than half the cops I've worked with. Ethan ducked his head, but Angela reached over, taking his hand in hers. You matter, Ethan. From now on, you're not alone. His small fingers tightened around hers, and for the first time in his young life, Ethan believed it. Weeks later, the city began to heal. Hayes's arrest had shaken the foundations of the department, forcing long overdue changes. Angela returned to light duty while awaiting the birth of her child. Paul, though limping permanently, found purpose in mentoring younger officers, determined to rebuild trust where corruption had festered. And Ethan? He was no longer the invisible boy of Detroit's alleys. Angela had taken him in, first unofficially, then with paperwork that made it permanent. For the first time, Ethan had a home. One crisp autumn afternoon, Angela sat on her porch with Ethan beside her. She sipped tea while he fiddled with an old radio they had salvaged, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Think you can make it work again?" she teased. He grinned, a spark of boyhood shining through. "If I could fix it in a burning tower, I can fix it here." Angela laughed softly, resting a hand on her belly. Any day now, her child would arrive. And when that day came, Ethan would no longer be alone. Paul stopped by, his cane tapping against the wooden steps. "Kid," he said to Ethan with a crooked smile, "you ever think about being a cop?" Ethan looked at Angela, then back at Paul. "Yeah, I think I do." Angela's eyes softened. "Then we'll make sure you get there, the right way." They sat together as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the city. The world was still flawed, still dangerous, but for the first time in a long while, Angela felt hope rooted deep. Life had tried to break them, but courage, hers, Paul's, and most of all, Ethan's, had carried them through. Epilogue. Angela's child was born healthy in late November, a little girl with her mother's eyes and a strong cry that filled the hospital ward. Ethan was the first to hold her after Angela, his hands trembling, his heart swelling with a love he had never known. "Her name is Grace," Angela whispered, "because that's what saved us." Ethan looked down at the baby, tears glistening in his eyes. For the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. He felt like family. The story that had begun in rain and blood ended in light and love. And those scars remained on their bodies, on their city, they carried forward with a lesson carved deep, that even in the darkest nights, courage can spark hope. And sometimes, the smallest voices, the ones the world forgets, are the ones that change everything. My dear friends, if you've stayed with me until the very last moments, surely your heart has gone through a whirlwind of emotions. Surprise, anger, compassion, even a lump in your throat at the choice made by the black female police officer. What do you think about her action? Was it admirable courage or a risky recklessness? If you were in her place, what would you do? Leave your comment below. If you believe that justice must be protected by the truth, press 1. If you feel there are still mysteries left unsolved, press 0. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you too will always stand on the side of justice, even though the path to the truth is never easy.